Good evening and welcome to Financial Aid Night. This is the most unusual financial aid night that we have conducted so far, but we're happy that everybody could be here with us. I see a lot of you, hundreds of you participating tonight, which is wonderful. So my name is Brian Glassberg. I am the supervisor of the school counseling department at J.P. Stevens High School, and I cover grades kindergarten through 12th grade on the north side of Edison. We do a lot of presentations for parents and for students throughout the high school years. And this year, many of them will be conducted remotely. This is the largest one that we've done so far remotely, and we hope it goes off well. It will be recorded. Please keep your video off. It will get posted to our website tomorrow or by early next week. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat during the presentation, and we'll attempt to answer them on the spot from one of our presenters, or they'll be talked about during the presentation. So we look forward to having many more events like this for you, because whether we are remote or whether we're in person, we're here to support you in the school counseling department. I would like to introduce one of our school counselors who helped put together tonight's event, Ms. Karen Kundari.
Thank you, Mr. Glassberg. Welcome everyone to our annual financial aid night. Thank you all for being here. And we have a wonderful speaker tonight. She is the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management, as well as Director of Financial Aid, right down the road at Monmouth University. We present to you this evening, Claire Alazio.
Great. Thank you, Karen, for that very kind introduction. I think this is my 6th or 7th year in presenting to Edison. A little different this year, but I'm glad that we're all gathering again, and I hope that you'll get what you came for. My plan tonight is to talk to you a little bit about what financial aid is, what's available, how do you go about getting it, some tips and tricks of the trade, if you will. As Mr. Glassberg noted, I have a member of my Cracker Jack team here with me, Monica Mikolajczyk, who she will be monitoring the chat. Monica also has a copy of my presentation, and she's heard me do this before. So if you ask a question that she knows is going to be addressed, she may ask you or let you know that will be addressed in the presentation. But certainly if you don't get the answer or you don't understand the answer, certainly feel free to ask a follow-up question. As I get through the material, we'll try to leave some time for questions at the end as well. And I think I noted somewhere in the chat that someone was asking if you could ask questions after the presentation, after watching the recording of the presentation. And my take on that is, if you have a question that isn't addressed during or after the presentation, please feel free to get your questions to Mrs. Kundari, and she certainly knows how to get a hold of me, and I will be happy to help in whatever way that I can. So with that being said, I'm going to flip back to my screen, and I think, yeah, there we go. And bear with me a second. We're not completely smooth on this, so we're doing the best we can to deal with the technology that we have, and I appreciate your patience as we do that. And why is my presentation not coming up? I don't know what happened here. So, okay, we're just going to go with it. Okay.
Can you resume the slideshow?
Thank you for your patience. Okay, a good place for me to start is I have this really long title that takes up 3 slides, 3 lines on a slide. And I guess I'd like to spend a minute talking about, well, what does that really mean and what does the financial aid office do? It's kind of like someone that works in tech, and when they're at a family gathering, the answer is always, oh, they're in computers, because it gets a little complicated. Nonetheless, when we work in financial aid, basically our role is to identify resources for students and distribute them in a fair and equitable manner. We do a fair amount of counseling with students and parents to help them explore their options in funding and education. And last but not least, and I think Monica would probably nod in agreement on this, that probably the most distasteful part of our job is the inevitable paper processing and record keeping. That is just a necessary evil that comes along with using federal or state government funds. So what exactly is financial aid? Financial aid is any, and I can't underscore that enough, money that helps the student pay for educational expenses, be they at a county college, a 4-year college or university, or at a trade school. The reason I underscore that word any is so often I hear from parents when they see their financial aid package that has a student loan in it, say, oh, I didn't want a loan, I wanted financial aid. Well, I just want to right up front dispel that myth and remind you that student loans are indeed financial aid. So that's your first tip of the evening, and so you'll be prepared for that when you hear that from the financial aid office at whatever college or university that you're working with. Which actually also reminds me that as I'm doing this presentation, this is not a commercial for Monmouth University. I am speaking from the perspective of how we do business at Monmouth in the financial aid office, although I would say that we are fairly typical of most colleges and universities around the country. There are some places where we might differ a little bit. So if I think that that's something that may be different at another institution, I will point that out to you so that you can make a note to be mindful of that as you're going through the college financial aid process. Moving on to the process. So I think for a lot of people, financial aid the process itself is a little daunting or intimidating. And it's something that, has expensive consequences if you don't get it right. And I think most parents are in fact concerned about that. That's why you're here tonight. After a long day of work, you're taking time out of your evening because you're concerned and you want to see how you can best navigate or negotiate this process. So hopefully in talking about this a little bit tonight, I can help demystify that for you a bit and make things just a little that much easier for you as you navigate these waters. Before I begin talking about the process, the first thing I should say to you is, and I can't put this on a slide because I'll get myself in trouble, but the first true step in the process is to take a bottle of your favorite adult beverage and put it in the refrigerator to chill. So we're going to get that chilling. And then the first step in the process that I'm allowed to talk about is you're going to complete an application. So for anyone that wants to pursue federal or state funding, you are going to complete the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA. There are some colleges and universities that require the CSS profile, which is done by the College Board, and it's an application that requires some information that's just slightly different than what is asked for on the FAFSA. And what I will say to you is that we don't use it at Monmouth. From my perspective, it's not something that's required by the federal government. So I don't want to require our students to go through an extra hoop in applying for aid. However, many universities do require the profile. That being said, most of them are very clear in their instructions or on their website that they do want you to do this application. If you don't see information about it, I would certainly contact the financial aid office and clarify whether or not you are expected to do the profile. Likewise, many institutions require an institutional financial aid application, which is yet another set of additional questions that the institution is asking for. Again, clarify with the financial aid office whether or not they do require an institutional application. Once you do, what happened there? Once you do your financial aid applications, the college or university will review the information you provided, and they will figure out what types and amounts of financial aid they're going to offer you. And they'll put that together in something called a financial aid package. And that's a vocabulary word that you're probably going to hear a lot in your college search process. That package will be communicated to you in something called an award letter. The award letter is simply just a list of the types and amounts of financial aid that you're being offered. Many schools these days are offering them digitally, but there are some schools that are still doing hard copy on it. Also, as part of the process, you may be asked to provide additional documentation. The feds created a process called verification, wherein they select roughly one in three FAFSAs for review. And if you get selected for verification, don't panic, okay? It does not mean that you did anything bad or wrong or that the government thinks that you're being fraudulent. It's just that they have a review process to keep people honest. Years ago, it was that applications that were selected, it truly was a random selection. Not so much anymore. I would say in the last 5 to 8 years, it has been less random, and there are certain red flags that will trigger a review, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. If you get selected, the college or university will provide you with very clear instructions as to what additional documentation you need to provide and how you need to provide it. My counsel to you is, if you get selected, try to provide the requested documentation as quickly as possible and in as complete a format as possible, because we can't move forward with processing your financial aid application until we complete the verification process. So it's to your advantage to move fairly quickly on this. Once the documentation is complete, the financial aid office will compare the data that you provided on the FAFSA with the data that's on your actual financial documents. If there's any discrepancies, the schools are required to correct the discrepancy and then recalculate your eligibility for financial aid. So it is possible that your aid could change for better or for the worse. Usually it's for the worse as a result of verification. So if your aid's going to change, you want to know that as soon as possible. So that's yet another reason to follow through fairly quickly on this. And then the last step in the process is to process any student loans. For most students, given the cost of a college education today, for most students, your financial aid package is going to involve a student loan. And that's going to necessitate doing an application and promissory note. And in the case of a federal loan, students will do something called an entrance counseling session. And if the parents are doing a loan, they will need to do a promissory note as well. Again, if loans are included in your financial aid package, the college or university will be very clear in their instructions to you as to what you need to do to secure your student loans. Okay, so I'm going to try to blow this up a little bit and spend a little more time talking about each component of the process. And then last but not least, when you've done all your documentation and your student loans, the money is actually dispersed or paid to the student's account, and that's how their bill with the school gets paid. So in terms of completing an application, for the FAFSA, first of all, you may file the FAFSA as early as October 1st, 2000. Oh, yikes, I didn't change that typo. You may file as early as October 1st, 2020 for the 21-22 academic year. When you file, you will use your prior year income. So you would use, and I think there was a question earlier tonight in the chat, when you're filing your 2021 FAFSA, and I apologize that the dates didn't get corrected on this, you will use your 2019 tax return. It's always 2 years behind. And then current data are things like your marital status and any assets on the day that you actually complete the FAFSA. Although you can file as early as October 1st, theoretically, you would have until June 30th of the following year to complete a FAFSA. But the reality is that most colleges want you to do this right away so that you can pay your bill. Also, as you'll hear later, there's many types of financial aid that are kind of a first come, first serve basis. So you want to check with the colleges and universities that you're interested in to see if they have any priority filing deadlines. And if they do, you certainly want to be mindful of that as you're doing applications. And then another important thing to note about the FAFSA is that you need to do, if you have multiple children in the household, you do one FAFSA per student per year. The reason that you do the FAFSA each year is that, as we all know, your financial circumstances can change from one year to the next. So what might have been true last year is not true this year. And that's why the feds have you redo a FAFSA every year. The reason that you do a different FAFSA for each child in the family is that the student's finances can be different. For example, with 2 children in the household, maybe one student is very industrious and has worked and has saved and has earnings, where the other student doesn't. So their finances might be a little different. And the data is unique to the individual student. In the last several years, the federal government has never made it easier to file the FAFSA. Quite honestly, there is no excuse not to file the FAFSA with all these methods at your disposal. You could complete the FAFSA on the web. You could do the mobile app and do it on your phone. You could file a paper version of it. You could call the Department of Ed and do it on the phone. or you could work with the financial aid office, and the financial aid office could file it for you. So there's many different methods, and the feds have tried to make it as simple as possible. What I will say, and this is your second tip of the night, while it is not required that you file the FAFSA electronically via the web or a phone app, I would strongly encourage you to do that. The reason that I encourage this is that when you're working in line with the FAFSA, as you might imagine from many websites, there's more access to help text and instructions and assistance than there is when you're working with a static paper form. The other thing, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, but when you're doing it electronically, you also have the opportunity to import your data directly from the IRS, which will certainly make things faster and a little bit easier for you. The last reason that I would encourage electronic filing is that it's faster and it gets processed faster. So again, it's not a requirement, but I do strongly encourage it and strongly recommend it. Given that perspective, I'm going to, as I give you some examples of filing methods, I'm going to stick with the examples that relate to filing electronically. So if you were to file on the web, this is a screenshot of what you might see when you went to the student aid website. And then I'm also going to show you a screenshot of what you might see if you chose to do the phone app. It looks very similar, but I don't know if you're anything like me. If there's an app for it, it's for me. So I just find it that much easier to work with. Again, that's a matter of personal preference. So I just wanted to give you a sample of what those looked like so that you knew what to expect. Now, to actually file the FAFSA, the first step in the process, oh, okay, it's, wow, okay. I'm sorry, I've got an old version of the presentation on the screen. It's got me a little thrown off. Earlier, I made reference to something called the Data Retrieval Tool, or DRT. When you do your FAFSA electronically, you can draw information in from the IRS and import it directly from the IRS into your FAFSA. Now, hopefully no one on the call works for the federal government before I get myself in trouble, but this, in my opinion, is miracle of miracles, that you have two governmental agencies, the IRS and the U.S. Department of Education, actually talking and working together to make things a little bit easier for students. Although the DRT is not required, this is also something that I would recommend that you do. Remember, if you recall back to way earlier in the presentation, I made a comment about there being some red flags that kind of caused FAFSAs to be selected for verification. One of the ways to avoid those red flags is to use the DRT. Because quite frankly, if you have imported your data from the IRS, there's no documentation that you're going to provide that's going to be any more accurate than what we got from the IRS. So it certainly is a way to help you avoid being selected for verification. Another advantage to the DRT is that, you know, how many of us, as you're seeing from my presentation tonight, how many of us have fat fingered something when we're typing or doing data entry and we've made a mistake? Well, in the financial aid game, fat fingering something could cost you time or money. So if you can eliminate that by doing the DRT, you're that much ahead of the game. And quite frankly, it saves keystrokes. It's faster. You can click a button and it imports the data and eliminates the amount of data entry that you're going to have to do. Now, even if you do the DRT, there are still going to be some other questions where you're going to have to provide some information, but you can get rid of the bulk of it by doing the DRT. Now, unfortunately, after I've sold you on the fact that the DRT is a really good thing, and you're thinking, oh, I really want to do this, there are some instances where I've posted here that where you cannot or you're ineligible to use the data retrieval tool. As you're working with the FAFSA, you will get a big giant error message if you attempt to do the DRT and you're not eligible, but I'm certainly kind of heading it off at the pass and giving you the information here so that you can determine whether or not you're eligible. Which, by the way, in addition to this recording being available, a copy of the presentation will be available. So don't worry if you don't get all these finer points down. The information will be available to you later. So, okay, one of the things that you need to do in order to be able to file a FAFSA is you need to get an FSA ID. And each student in the household, each student that will be a college student, needs to have their own ID, and at least one parent has to have the ID. One parent can use their ID to sign for multiple children, but each child needs their own unique ID. The reason that the ID is important is when you get to the end of the FAFSA and you're ready to click submit, you'll need the ID to be able to sign the FAFSA electronically, submit it, and move forward. So if you do nothing else, first thing you got to do is get the FSA ID. In fact, you all could go out and start doing that right now. But you need to make sure that you get that taken care of. So when you sit down to do the FAFSA, here's an example of information that you want to have available to you before you sit down that you're going to need. Okay, who just scribbled all over the screen? Anyway, so you're going to need certain identifying information like your social security number or your A number, and information about your tax return, your cash, savings, checking, and other assets. It's probably easier if you gather all that information ahead of time so that when you sit down to work on the FAFSA, you have what you need and it kind of flows through and you can move forward and get it completed. As an example of preparing to do the FAFSA, you could do the FAFSA on the web worksheet. Usually when I come to the school, I usually have sample copies of this to distribute to the parents, but I believe that you can download it from the student aid website. Once you've done the FAFSA on the web worksheet, and you've gathered your information, then you can log in and do your FAFSA and work through the questions. Once you work through the questions and you finish, you get to the last page and you click submit. When you click submit, you will get a confirmation page showing that your FAFSA has been submitted, and you will get information about your expected family contribution. And you will get, if I were to expand this IRS information, you would get information to confirm the data that you supplied on the FAFSA. Now, before you get that adult beverage out of the refrigerator, you're not quite done yet. the state of New Jersey may require some additional information from you, and you may be expected to supply that later. And once you finish that, then you get to open the adult beverage. So we're going to skip past that. So earlier I mentioned that some colleges and universities require the CSS profile. Although I don't use it at Monmouth, as I noted earlier, I feel a responsibility to you to provide a sample of a screenshot of what the CSS profile website would look like, just so that you know what to expect when you see that there. I know that my understanding is that we have mostly senior parents who were invited tonight. In case we have parents of juniors, or you know someone that's a parent of junior, I've included 2 other slides that will help you in your quest for college funding. One is the FAFSA forecaster. So you could, without formally submitting a FAFSA, you could enter your financial information and get an estimate of what your expected family contribution is. And as you're making your college visits, and you want to discuss with financial aid offices what your financial aid package might look like, you could bring that with you and use that as a basis for having conversation. The other thing that I want excuse me, to call your attention to is something called the net price calculator, or NPC. I want to say about a dozen years ago, the feds required that every school in the country, somewhere on their website, post a net price calculator, which allows the student or parent to enter certain pieces of income data, and it'll spit out what type of financial aid and amount of financial aid that particular institution might offer you. And after all financial aid is considered, what your out-of-pocket cost would be, or what you would be expected to pay at that school. I think that's a really good tool to use before you think about making college visits. For example, years ago, I had one of my cousins who, as a family member, I've said, hey, let me know when you're ready to look at colleges. I'll be glad to help you. And they never took me up on that advice until it was time to file the FAFSA. And we're sitting in my kitchen filing the FAFSA, and she and her son were slated to go out to an accepted student day at a college in Western Pennsylvania. And they live at the shore, so it would have been a 6 or 7 hour drive. And, we went through the net. I knew that I was familiar with that particular school. So I said, hey, let's do your net price calculator and see, what your costs might be at this school. And, it turns out when we did the net price calculator that what they would have had to pay was far out of reach and out of their just realm of possibility to be able to afford it. Now, had we not done the net price calculator, they would have spent 6 hours on the road each way, only to find out, ooh, this is something we can't afford. So I strongly encourage you to have those sorts of conversations with your student early on in terms of what we as a family can legitimately afford, and, kind of confine your scope to institutions where you believe the cost is manageable for you. And one way that you can do that is through the net price calculator on the school's website. So I hope that's some useful information for you. Several times you've heard me reference the financial aid package. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how does that package get created? How do we arrive there? When you do your FAFSA, no matter how you do the FAFSA, it gets submitted to the Central Processing System, or CPS, which is the federal government. They take the data that you provide, and they massage it through their computer system and their formulas, and they spit out the data, and they will send it electronically to the student. And it will give you an opportunity to review the data and make sure that it's all correct and that there was no fat fingering. If you're a resident of the state of New Jersey, the feds will send the information to the New Jersey Higher Education Student Assistance Authority, or HESA. And then at the same time, they will send the information electronically to the colleges and universities that you listed on the FAFSA. So what do we all do with that information? I want to go into some concepts that I think are fairly important, and important for you to get a handle on. The first of which is the expected family contribution, or EFC. That word is really important, and you're going to hear that pretty much at every college or university that you talk to. The EFC is derived from a formula that is based on the data that you provide on the FAFSA. And it's a way of comparing the relative financial strength of one family to another. Back in the day when I started in this business, the EFC truly was what a family could be expected to pay for a college education. Nowadays, it's not. And I think that is also a big myth that we in the financial aid office have to dispel when we're working with students and parents. These days, I think you will be much less disappointed if you take my advice and you just think of the expected family contribution as an index, or a way of comparing families. The reason that it's important to compare relative financial strength is because everyone's situation is different, and there's a number of variables that are considered on the FAFSA that impact your finances. So to give you an example, if you have two families, each of whom makes $100,000 a year, on the surface, that sounds the same, right? But in reality, family number one is a family of three with one child going to college. They live in East Oshkosh, Illinois, and they have $100,000 in the bank. And the parents are, they're probably in their late 40s. So they have plenty of time to work before and recoup what they spent on education before they're ready to retire. Family number two also makes $100,000 a year. However, they live in Bergen County, New Jersey, which is one of the most expensive counties in the country to live in. They are a family of six. They have three children in college at the same time. And as you might imagine, with three children in college, they have no money in the bank. And the parents are in their early 60s. So they don't have much time left to work to recoup their whatever they spend on education. So as you can see, what started out being relatively equal, when you dive a little bit deeper, those are two very different financial pictures. And I guarantee you that each of those families will have a very different expected family contribution. Hopefully that illustration helps to underscore the point of why the expected family contribution is important. The reason that it's important to understand the concept of EFC is, and we talked about this, so we're going to talk about a concept called financial need. And this is tip number 3 of the night. Financial need is a word that you are going to hear at every college or university that you talk to. And it's a very simple formula as defined on this slide. It's the cost of attendance, and I'll flip back to that and we'll talk about that in a moment. What does it cost to attend minus what the expected family contribution is? What could you contribute toward education? And the difference or gap is your financial need. Need is a very important concept because many types of financial aid, both governmental aid and institutional aid, are based on your financial need. So it's just important to understand why you may or may not qualify for a particular type of financial aid. I wanted to back up a minute and talk to you about cost of attendance. When colleges or universities are talking to you about cost of attendance, they are talking about total cost of attendance, meaning tuition and fees, room and board if you're a student living on campus, an allowance for off-campus expenses if you're commuting, books and supplies, transportation, and then miscellaneous other personal expenses. And that all gets rolled together to calculate the total cost of attendance. Now, the interesting thing about the definition of need is your need is going to change from school to school. Because think about what I just said about cost of attendance. If your cost of attendance includes something like tuition and fees, that's going to be different at every school that you talk to. But your expected family contribution is a constant. That is an index that stays the same no matter what school you're talking with. So I want to give you an example of how your need can change from one institution to another. So in institution number 1, their total cost of attendance is $35,000. My guess is that institution 1 is probably a 4-year New Jersey public institution. The family's expected family contribution is $15,000. So that makes their need $20,000. However, at school number 2, the cost of attendance is $60,000. They're probably a 4-year private. The expected family contribution is a constant. It remains the same. At institution number 2, the student's financial need is $45,000. So hopefully that helps to explain why your financial aid package may be different from one school to another. And I share that with you just so that you know, if you see a difference and you say that you apply to Rutgers, Stockton, and Monmouth, and you get 3 very different financial aid packages, this very slide is part of the reason why. And I just want to offer that to you to help you understand that a little bit better. Now I'm going to talk about the good stuff. The stuff that really everybody wants to hear is what are the types of financial aid that are available to students. Before I get to that, I do want to mention that for federal and state funding, there are some basic eligibility requirements. Students have to have a high school diploma or the recognized equivalent. They need to be enrolled in a school and a program that is eligible to award funding. They need to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. They have to have a valid social security number or a valid A number. And they need to be registered with Selective Service if they are genetically male. Okay, now we'll get to the good stuff. So generally, financial aid comes in 4 forms. loans, as I mentioned earlier, and it's no different than a mortgage loan. It's some money that is borrowed and repaid with interest. Scholarships, which are free money. Typically, scholarships are some sort of merit or talent based, whether they're based on academic merit or, years ago I worked at a school that was wanting to start a marching band, so they were giving tuba scholarships because they wanted tuba players. Grants are also free money, money that doesn't need to be repaid. Those are typically based on financial need, and that's why we spent a bit of time talking about need earlier. And then last, you have work study or employment, where just like you and I go to work and we receive a paycheck for the work that we do, students can work on the campus and receive a paycheck for the work that they perform. My experience with work study is that it typically does not credit to or pay the student's account, but rather the check goes directly to the student and they can use it for personal expenses that are related to their cost of education. Generally, loans and work study are called self-help aid. You might see that on a financial aid award letter. And all that means is that the student had to do something to obtain that financial aid. Grants and scholarships are typically known as gift aid, where it's free money, you didn't really have to do anything to get it, and you don't have to repay it. So let's talk a little bit about the various sources of financial aid. The biggest source of financial aid is the federal government. Probably the second largest source is the state government. Most colleges and universities have a fairly significant aid program. That's what keeps people like me employed. There are many private sources like corporations and foundations, et cetera, that may offer financial aid. And last but not least, employers often offer scholarship programs to their employees. They often offer tuition benefits for their employees or for their employees' children. But in my experience, these are generally the sources that I see aid coming from. Given that the feds are the largest provider of aid, I just wanted to spend a moment talking with you about the aid programs that are available from the federal government. The first is the federal Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is based on financial need. It is actually driven by your expected family contribution. The lower the contribution, the bigger the Pell Grant. The schools do not have any control over how much Pell Grant you receive. Frankly, every year we're given a chart. We plunk our finger down on your EFC, and whatever number is in that box, that's the award that you get. So we have no control over it. Pell Grants are limitless in supply. If I have 1,500 students that meet the federal requirement for a Pell Grant, all 1,500 students will get the Pell Grant. The next thing you might see in a financial aid package is the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG. The SEOG is a twin, if you will, to the Pell Grant. Usually, most times when you see a Pell Grant, you will see SEOG. The interesting thing about SEOG is that the feds give each school a pot of money to award, and they allow us to decide how we want to award it and how much we want to award. Those awards can range anywhere from $100 to $4,000. And as I said, each school has a different formula for determining the award value. At our institution, I know that roughly every year I'm going to have about 1,000 students. So everyone gets a fair share of our SOG pot. Not every school works that way. So my advice to you is that if you see anything less than $4,000 in your financial aid package, that is an opportunity to speak to the financial aid office other than Monmouth, because we won't change it. But it's an opportunity to speak to the financial aid office and ask, could they increase that award for you? Another grant program offered by the federal government is the TEACH grant. This is a grant available to students who are interested in teaching in low-income school districts in a high-need field. High-need fields are things like English as a second language, reading, math, English, etc. The student can earn up to $4,000 per year in a grant for a total of $16,000, up to $16,000 as an undergraduate student. However, the student has a teaching obligation when they graduate. They have 8 years to teach for in a low-income district. If the student does not fulfill that service obligation, the grant reverts to a loan with interest having accrued from the date that the grant was dispersed. So I think this is a good program, but I think it warrants careful consideration. For example, one of my college friends had her great passion in life was wanting to teach kindergarten in Miami and teach students who had language barriers. And you know what? 35 years later, she just retired this past fall and spent her entire career doing that. This grant would have been perfect for her because she absolutely and easily would have fulfilled the service obligation. For other students who are less sure of what they might want to do after graduation, I think they need to think carefully about whether or not this grant is an appropriate option for them. And that's, certainly something you can talk through with an academic advisor and explore that option. The feds also offer the Iraq-Afghanistan service grant to students who have had a parent who was killed in either Iraq or Afghanistan. The grant is equivalent to the maximum Pell Grant each year. There is nothing further that the student needs to do. The federal government is well aware, and they will make the schools aware that the student is entitled to the grant. The feds also offer the federal work-study program, which is, as the name implies, work for pay. Most schools do offer the program. It is need-based. There goes that word again. The jobs are usually clerical in nature. I think work study, if the student has the opportunity, I think it's a good opportunity. I think it allows students to learn real life skills. If we all think back to our first professional job, nobody sat you down in a classroom and told you, here's what it means to be a professional. I think though that's something that students can learn through a work study job. I think it's also an opportunity for them to develop connections. And we all know that sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. I know for me as an undergraduate student, I was a psychology major and I worked as an assistant in the department. And over time, I got to know the department chair and she got to know me. And when it came time for graduate school, she was able to write me a really good personal letter of recommendation that I absolutely believe helped me get into a competitive graduate school program. Again, something to think about if you don't see it in the student's financial aid package, that's certainly something that you could ask the financial aid office if the student qualified and could they add it to the package. Another very large program that the federal government funds is the Federal Direct Student Loan Program, or direct loans. And when people use the word student loans, this is what they are meaning. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about loans in a minute, because I think that's very important. And then last are the federal plus loans, or parent loans for undergraduate students. So if there is a gap between the cost of education and the financial aid that the student is being offered, parents, one option for parents to help pay that gap is to use a parent loan. So these following slides, I actually did that verbally without having to read off the slides. So I'm glad that my memory's still working, but at least the slides will be in the presentation and will be available for your reference. All right, so we talked about all that. We talked about that. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you more about loans. You know, every time I do the presentation, and I know this is really weird for me in doing this presentation, because usually I have eye contact with and connect with the audience as I'm coming to this point in the presentation. You know, I talk to families a lot who will say, you know, I don't want my student to have loans. I think that, you know, in my experience in this business, I think families fall onto a continuum about money. I think there are some families that feel that, you know, a college education is their responsibility to pay for, and they don't want their student to have loans. Then they have, you know, families on the other end of the pendulum who feel, you know what, I raised you till you're 18. I've fed you, I've housed you, I've clothed you. My work here is done, and you'll figure it out on your own. I'm not here to place value judgment on either of those perspectives, but I do want to give you some things to think about. First of all, now more so than ever, student loans are a very affordable way to finance an education. Currently, the interest rate on a subsidized loan, and you'll hear more about that in a minute, is 2. Is it 8.5 or 7.5, Monica? 8?
Sorry, 2.7. I'm answering you and I'm looking right at you, but I didn't unmute myself. 2.75.
Thank you. Had a little memory lapse there. You know, that's a very cheap way to borrow money. Second, you know, I think that I can point to quite a bit of education, you know, respectable academic literature that suggests that students who have a financial stake in their education perform better. Think about your own children. When they have invested their time and energy to earn money to pay for something, they tend to take a little better care of it than when it's something that they've been given or that mom and dad shelled the money out for. So this is an opportunity to also teach your student about responsibility and about having some skin in the game. And even if you're one of those families on this end of the spectrum that believe that the responsibility for education rests with the parents, you know what? Let the student take the loan out. Let them think that they have responsibility for the loan. And if you choose to pay it at the end for them, that's fine. The federal government doesn't care who the check comes from, as long as the check comes. So, You know, and the other piece of it is that, you know, your primary goal as parents is to have them move out of the house. So one of the best ways to help them do that is to have good credit. And guess what? One of the ways to establish good credit is a paid off student loan. So if you chose to allow your student to have a loan and you paid it off for them, kind of in the end, you're helping yourself because you're going to help them fly the nest. So again, just something to give you a little food for thought on that. To give you a deeper dive about student loans, and again, I apologize, these slides are not updated, and I will give Mrs. Kandari the updated version of the slide. A subsidized loan is based on financial need. And what it means is that the loan does not accrue interest while the student is in school. And then 6 months after the student graduates, the loan begins to accrue interest. And currently the interest rate is 2.75%. And that is fixed for the life of the loan. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that the interest may be tax deductible. So it's really, really cheap way to borrow money. Students may qualify for up to $5,500 per year in subsidized funding. First year students can qualify for $3,500, sophomores $4,500, and juniors and seniors $5,500. The reason for that differential across grade levels is that, and again, there's a lot of research that points to the fact that as students progress through grade levels, they are more likely to complete their college degree. If they complete their college degree, they are more likely to repay their student loan. So the feds are kind of thinking, all right, we're going to risk less on those freshmen who may not make it through and may not pay us back. And gee, by the time you're a senior, we're pretty sure you're going to graduate and pay us back. So we're willing to risk a little bit more on you. For those students who do not have financial need, they can also get an unsubsidized loan. With the unsub, it accrues interest while the student is in school. And again, every student, regardless of your parents' financial circumstances, can qualify for an unsubsidized loan. Again, the same issue of the $3,500, $4,500, $5,500 applies here. In addition, every student, whether they qualify for an unsub or a sub, also qualifies for another $2,000 in unsubsidized funding. Same terms and conditions apply.
Claire?
Yes.
I have the updated slideshow. Do you want me to put it up from my end?
At this point, Karen, by the time we flip through and get where we're at, let's just make sure the updated is posted to your website.
Yep. Okay, sounds good.
Cool, thanks. Okay, and then last, we have the parent loan for undergraduate students that I mentioned earlier. The thing to keep in mind with the parent loan is that it is credit based. So if you feel that you have some credit challenges, you definitely want to talk to the financial aid office and let us know about that and let us help you figure out what your best options are. Earlier, I mentioned that another source of financial aid is through the state. In the state of New Jersey, we are very fortunate to be able to say that we are 5th in the nation in terms of spending on access to higher education. New Jersey students can access funding through the tuition aid grant or TAG grant program. That is also a need-based program. The state has their own eligibility requirements or eligibility index for it, and it kind of works like the Pell. They give us a chart, we plunk a number down, and that determines the award that you get. The New Jersey STARS program, based upon the student's rank in class and their GPA, Stars 1 will offer them a free education at a county college, and Stars 2, if you continue on to a public school after completing your associate's degree, can also offer a free education at a public. If you are attending a New Jersey private, the state will give you a grant to help you Stars graduates attend a private institution in the state. The Educational Opportunity Fund, or EOF program, is a program that's available to students from lower income families. Every institution in the state, with the exception of Princeton, has an EOF recruitment office on campus. If you believe you might qualify, you can contact the EOF office on campus and see if you meet their particular campus-based eligibility requirements. The state has also developed the World Trade Center Scholarship for students who had a parent or guardian who passed away in the 9/11 attacks. The survivor tuition benefits are available to children whose parents were killed. They're either firefighters, police, Port Authority, etc. The Law Enforcement Officer Memorial Scholarship is for students whose parent was a police officer killed in the line of duty. The NJ Best Scholarship is for those students who are fortunate enough to have their families have had a 529 plan with the state of New Jersey. You get a one-time $500 scholarship if you use that 529 plan at an institution, either public or private, in the state. And then we have the Governor's Urban Scholarship. And then last but not least, the state offers its own supplemental loan program to kind of cover that gap between all other aid and the cost of attendance, known as the New Jersey Class Loan. The kind of interesting thing about the NJ Class Loan is that if you're a New Jersey resident attending school in state, you could use it. If you're an out-of-state resident attending school in New Jersey, you can use it. Or if you're a New Jersey resident attending out-of-state, you could take your NJ Class Loan to an out-of-state institution. The piece of advice, and this is tip number 4, that I would give you, is that if you're going to a school out of state, in a state other than like the surrounding states of New York, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Connecticut, you might want to give the financial aid office a heads up that you're going to use the NJ Class Loan. Because there are some states, I would imagine in East Oshkosh, Illinois, they probably do not see very many NJ Class Loans. And what is natural human tendency? If there is something that comes across your desk and you don't know what to do with it, it automatically goes to the bottom of the pile. So again, you might want to, if you use the NJ Class out of state, you might want to stay on top of that with the aid office. Financial aid, institutional aid is going to vary from institution to institution. My experience has been that most colleges and universities offer some form of university-funded scholarship or grant program, some form of need-based grant. Many institutions offer employment programs that supplement the federal work-study program. Some schools offer small institutional loans that can add to the package and help out in a pinch. And then most colleges and universities offer some sort of monthly or semester-wide payment plan. Again, you would need to check with the particular financial aid offices or look at the school's websites to find more information about these institution-specific programs. And then I also suggested that there are private sources of financial aid. The one point that I would like to make here in particular is about private scholarships. Every year, millions of dollars of scholarship funding go unclaimed simply because students don't want to do an application or write an essay or do some homework. I would suggest to you as parents to get on them. I know most high schools maintain a database of scholarships. I know on our university website, we maintain a database. There are also scholarship search engines like FastWeb, where you can pump in some criteria about yourself and it will search for scholarships, scholarship opportunities that the student can apply for. And I think when you're pushing your student, try to keep in mind that, you know, if they have to spend an hour or two writing an essay and they get $1,000 scholarship out of it, you know, that's a $500 an hour payoff. You know I certainly don't make $500 an hour. So, you know, I think that that's certainly a worthwhile venture. I think if you take nothing away from this part of the presentation, just leave no stone unturned. Like, you know, you all are smart people. You know how to Google. You know how to use the internet. You have access to Naviance or to the school's website. Do your homework and do some research. And, you know, every dollar that you can come up with is that much less that you have to finance or that you have to come up with. So it's definitely to your advantage to do that. Okay, so I promised you tips and tricks of the trade. The first thing that the first and probably most important thing that I want to mention is, remember that when we talked about the FAFSA, we said that you were going to file using income data that's 2 years old, right? So for 2021, you're going to use your 2019 tax return. Well, as we all know from the horror show that 2020 has been, and I hope that in all earnest that no one in the audience tonight has been severely affected economically by COVID. But the fact of the matter is that in 2 years, your financial circumstances can change quite dramatically. And the 2020 horror show is evidence of that. I have a family member who lives up in Hunterdon County and owns a diner. They have been shut down since March. They're about to lose their home. Now that, you know, they're trying to open back up, they are going to lose their home because they were out of business for 3.5 months. You know, so unfortunately, those kinds of circumstances are not, there's nowhere on the FAFSA to explain that. So the Fed's created a process called professional judgment or special circumstances review. The word is going to be different at every school, but it's a process that helps the financial aid office take into account any unique or unusual circumstances that are beyond your control. What I will say to you is that every school does have this process, but the process, you know, the federal government requires us to have the process. The federal government does not prescribe what that process has to be. Number one. Number two, simply because you present a set of circumstances to the financial aid office, that is no guarantee that they are going to consider those circumstances. You know, each school is allowed to decide what they will and will not consider and what they will and won't do. And another thing to keep in mind is that when you go through the professional judgment process, the financial aid office is going to take the changes to your circumstances and they're going to rejig the math and in essence redo your FAFSA and have it reflect your current circumstances. The reality is that sometimes that does not change your EFC. So you need to be prepared for that. That you may go through this process and it may not change your financial aid. So I just, as Monica would confirm for you, we talk in our office a lot about managing expectations. So in fairness to you all, I am trying to, and my other financial aid colleagues out there, I am trying to manage your expectations. What I would say to you about the professional judgment process is that if you have unusual circumstances, first of all, don't be embarrassed by it. I've been in this business nearly 30 years, and believe it or not, I have heard it all. And what may feel unique or uncomfortable or difficult for you is very matter of fact for the financial aid office. And, professional people aren't going to judge you because you've encountered some financial difficulties. So as difficult or awkward as it may be, communicate with the financial aid office. If you don't make us aware of those circumstances, we can't try to help you figure it out. Be prepared to document what you're telling us and what you're asking us to do. I can't simply accept your word that you lost a job. I need to see documentation of your W-2s or your unemployment stubs or so on and so forth to make whatever changes on the FAFSA we need to make. I think this last bullet point is most important of all. Be nice to the financial aid office. We want to help. We're not the big mean green machine. And we understand that you're worried or that you're upset or you're frustrated, but we didn't create the situation. We're only trying to help. So try to be nice to us in the process. As my mom always used to say, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. The other piece of managing your expectation, like I said, different schools are going to do different things. Don't bother explaining things on your CSS or your FAFSA because that explanation, the feds aren't going to do anything with it. And then, don't submit a request for money to cover sort of frivolous kinds of circumstances. We used to keep a file in the office of the kind of silly letters that we would get. I remember years ago, one year we had a father writing to us that he wanted his FAFSA changed because he had spent $75,000 on a wedding for his older daughter. Well, that was a choice he made. So please reserve this process for legitimate circumstances beyond your control. Okay, so another very important tip that I'm going to give you, and I know this sounds very elementary, is read. Read your mail, read your instructions, review things. Financial aid folks, quite honestly, we like bullet points and we like checklists. We love to give you like bulleted lists of instructions. We try to give explicit, detailed instructions because if we help you get it right the first time, it makes our job easier and your life less frustrating. But in order for that to work, you have to read the instructions. A number of years ago, I had a parent call me screaming about, the fact that her son had lost some financial aid due to a particular policy. And why wasn't she notified? And I very calmly proceeded to point out and provide copies of the 18 different places that we publish that information and an email receipt showing that an email had been sent to her son and opened by her son. And the mother's response to me was, Well, you didn't expect him to read that, did you? And I very calmly and politely said, yes. Like, we sent it to you because we expected you to read it. So, okay, I won't beat that horse any longer. So here's an important one. Please maintain copies of any documents that you submit to the financial aid office. You know, although we try to be respectful of your documentation and very careful with it, the reality is that we serve 5,000, you know, our institution serves over 5,000 students a year. And although we have an electronic imaging system and we no longer lose paper, sometimes we misfile stuff. You know, although we try to be careful, we're human beings and it's going to happen. And when it does happen, while I will call you and I will be humbly apologetic, you can be angry at me as you want to be, but the fact remains is that I still need that particular piece of paper. Like, remember that verification process that we talked about? If I need to have your tax return on file, even though I'm really sorry that I misplaced it, I still have to have it. If you've maintained copies of everything, it kind of makes it a more no harm, no foul situation. So that's certainly something I would advise you to do. This is a good one. So up until now, you all have been in charge and you've signed off on permission slips and school forms and but here's the weird thing. Now that they're 18 and in college, they are now responsible. And they are now in charge. So please do not sign their name for them. This is an opportunity for you as parents to teach your son or daughter about money management and fiscal responsibility and how to conduct their financial life. It's kind of a lesson in adulting with you there to back them up. And trust me, we can tell the difference between a 19-year-old young man's handwriting and his mom's handwriting. So we know. So we would really encourage you not to do that. And the corollary to that is to involve your student. You know, I'm sure many of you in the audience have sons or daughters that are considering going away to college and to living on campus. And, you know, when they're handling their business with the financial aid office, they're the ones in front of us. And I can't tell you how many times we have had students come into the office and say, my mom sent me. Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about why your mom told you to come in today? I don't know. She just told me to come here. If you don't involve them and they don't know what's going on, we can't help them. And they're the ones that are standing in front of us. So you got to keep them in the know. And I think I kind of made this point earlier. Talk to us. You know, we understand that the reason that we have a job is because students enroll at our university. And sometimes for many students, they can't enroll without our help. But, you know, you have to let us in and you have to let us help you. My crystal ball has been in the shop for the last 20 something years. It doesn't work. So if you don't let me know that you need my help, I can't help you. Now, what I will say to you is that, you know, I think you can tell from the way I conduct myself and the sort of exchanges that nonverbal exchanges that Monica and I are having on video, that we operate an office that is very student centric. And, you know, we were just having this conversation in a staff meeting this morning that my expectation is that students who come to our office will always be treated with dignity, courtesy, and respect. And that you know, our goal is to help these young people and their families. I will tell you that not every financial aid office is like that. There are many offices that are not student friendly or customer friendly, and they feel like they are extensions of the IRS and that they have a fiduciary responsibility to the federal government to protect the federal government's money. I feel the same way too, but I can do it with a smile on my face and be friendly and helpful about it while I'm doing it. So I do want to prepare you for the fact that you are going to run into aid offices that do not exactly give you the warm and fuzzies when you interact with them. Let me apologize on their behalf in advance, and I'm sorry that you will have to run into that. But again, it's about managing expectations, and I just want to prepare you for that. One last point that I wanted to make with you all is regarding the use of financial aid consultants and services. Around this time of year, these folks start to do mailings. One year I was doing a presentation at Ocean Township High School in Monmouth County. And when I came out of the presentation, one of these wackos had put his business card on every windshield of the cars in the parking lot while I'm doing a financial aid presentation. These people often do not have direct financial aid experience, and they're going to charge you money for something that either I haven't told you for free tonight, or that you couldn't find out by doing some homework on your own, or by contacting the financial aid office and asking for help. So if you get approached by someone, or you get a mailer by someone that promises, you know, for $2,000, I'll do your FAFSA and I'll help you find more financial aid. Please don't waste your money. Your $2,000 is better spent, you know, making a payment on your tuition for the year. So I will get off my soapbox on that. And that's sort of my public service announcement to you. So that now I'm kind of coming to the end of the information that I have to spew at you. I also just like to sort of throw out Monmouth social media accounts, because even if you're not interested in enrolling at Monmouth, on our Facebook page especially, we put out a lot of really useful information and videos and scholarship opportunities that really a student that's going to another college or university might find helpful. So certainly check us out, and, you know, feel free to use us as a resource. How are we, Monica? How are we doing with questions?
So I think Ms. Kandar is going to jump back in for a second, and then we'll do some more questions.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I will stop the screen share. And Karen, have at it.
Thank you. Just give me just a couple of minutes. Okay, for those of you who logged on a little late, I'm Karen Kandari. I'm one of the school counselors here at JP Stevens. And I just wanted to add a couple of things onto, of course, all this wonderful information that Claire gave us tonight. Thank you so much. So within our school, we do have some financial resources available as well outside of the FAFSA. One of the places you can find this is on the JP Stevens Counseling website. And you can get there just on the JP Stevens regular site, and then you can go to menu and counseling. You'll find us there. So on the right-hand side, there is a menu bar, and you will find financial aid and scholarships. And then under that, we have resources, which you will find different scholarship websites. And I know Claire mentioned FastWeb earlier. We have loads of websites there that you can start to look for scholarship applications for your child. There's also federal and state financial aid resources, a lot of what Claire spoke about tonight. So if you want a little more explanation, I know a lot of you were asking in the chat what certain words meant, you can find it here. Current scholarship offers, we have our college counselors that are constantly updating this website. So whenever we find scholarships that come to us in the school, we post them here with deadlines and links to the application. The financial aid packet is also there, and that's going to be additional handouts that I would have given out in person tonight, but I will be posting them up by Monday. And then the final thing would be this presentation. So I know Claire mentioned that some of the dates and the percentages on loans were off for tonight. So we will post this presentation with her speaking, and we will also put up the slideshow with the correct dates and numbers in that. And then finally, the senior survey. So this is something that goes out in January to every senior, and we ask for it back sometime in February. These surveys will determine your child's eligibility for school, local, and community scholarships. So some of you are also asking in the chat about local scholarships, and these are scholarships that your kids cannot find on any website anywhere. Okay, these are only given out through the school, and the way they qualify is by filling out the senior survey. And then those scholarships will be awarded at Senior Awards Night in May. So now we're going to turn this over to questions. We are going to post the chat and the answers. I know a lot of you were trying to flip back and forth and it was kind of hard to follow both. So we are going to post a transcript of that as well, along with, like I said, the live presentation and along with the slideshow. So right now, if anyone has any additional questions, you can raise your hand in the chat and Mr. Glassberg will unmute you and then you can ask the question. And we're gonna go probably until about 8:30, so it gives us about 11 minutes or so. And then afterwards, if you have questions, you can always email us at the guidance office and we will help get the answers through Claire. Sound good, Claire?
Works for me.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to go offline there for a minute to guzzle something. I thought my tongue was going to dry up there.
So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. That's a feature, not with your camera, but in the chat participant area, you'll see a raise hand feature. Okay, and I see someone who's identified as iPhone. I am going to allow you to unmute.
So question is, if somebody parents are earning more than $200,000, are their kids are qualified, can they get financial aid?
I'm going to give you the classic financial aid answer. It depends. The reality is that you will likely not qualify for federal or state need-based aid. If you are a citizen or an eligible non-citizen, every student is entitled to at least an unsubsidized loan. And you may or may not qualify for institutional money. The institutional money, the eligibility requirements vary from school to school. My advice to you would be do the FAFSA at least once, see what it yields and see what the school requires and what the school will offer you. And then if you find that it didn't yield anything for you, don't do it again in the future.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are there other questions? Okay, so Claire, is there anything else that, oh, I see one more here. Krishna, I'm going to allow you to unmute, Krishna.
Hey, thanks, Brian.
Mhm.
This is a follow-on question for the earlier. Just now, somebody asked the question there. We may not we may not be eligible for the subsidized loans if it is income is more than 200K. But can we get the kind of the loans and the other things that were talked about?
Okay, I'm not quite sure I understood your question.
Okay, the earlier question was, if the income is 200K or more, 200,000 or more, do we get benefit out of FAFSA? Do we get the loans?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, in order to do not only the student loan, but the parent loan, you have to do a FAFSA. So as I said, you may not get need-based funding, grants or scholarships, but it is certainly a requirement to do a student or a parent loan.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, RS. The person identified as RS is able to unmute themselves.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation, Claire. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have a question with regards to the non-subsidized loans? Is there any advantage in seeking a non-subsidized loan as opposed to other avenues such as a parental loan, for instance?
Yes, absolutely. I would absolutely, because the interest rates are so low this year, and that will be, and it's a fixed rate loan. So, you know, that interest rate will follow through for the life of the loan. The interest rate on the student loan is much lower than that on the parent loan. So I absolutely would exhaust that opportunity first before exploring other parent loan options. I think, and that actually raises another point. Every year on July 1, Congress authorizes new interest rates for the next school year. Given, and again, remember my crystal ball doesn't work, but given the current state of the economy and that this is, next year we'll have either a returning or a new president in office, and higher education is always a political football. I would not be surprised if next year we saw interest rates low again, like they are this year, just because the economy is in the tank. So yeah, I would definitely do the unsubsidized loan first before exploring options for the parent.
Next up is Mahesh. Mahesh, you are able to unmute.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
So my question is, it's related to twin situation. I have a twin boys going to
God
the
love you.
college. Yeah. So what is the benefit? How we can? What are all the advantages on the FAFSA?
So for you, remember the example that I gave of the two different families where one family had only one child in college? For you, you're going to report your household size, and you're going to have two kids in college as opposed to the one, which will change your EFC. So that's certainly an advantage to you. I think in terms of searching for scholarships, I know that oftentimes there's a lot of scholarships out there for students who are multiples. If they land at the same college or university, I would ask if there's a family discount for multiple children enrolled at the same school. We don't offer it, but I know that there are schools that do.
Okay.
So those would be the advantages to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next up is Omar, and we have 4 people with their hands up. We'll try to stop it there, but feel free to add more questions to the chat and we'll get those answered for you in the chat. So we're going to go through the 4 people who have their hand up. Omar is next. You can unmute, Omar.
Hi, I'm here with my mom. My mom can't really speak English that well.
Okay.
So my mom wants to know, one, I didn't take my SAT yet or my ACT, so she wants to know if that affects the financial aid in any way and if I can use financial aid outside the country.
So with the SAT and ACT for the next, I'm assuming, Omar, are you a senior?
Yes.
So a lot of schools are going SAT optional for the next year because, you know, these past couple of months, students haven't had access to the tests. That being said, I'm going to kind of answer this from a Monmouth perspective. It wouldn't impact your institutional aid with us. That would be something that you would check with the colleges that you're interested in. And as far as federal or state funding, the SAT or ACT has no bearing on your financial aid. So you don't need to worry about that. And with regard to using aid outside the country, again, classic answer, it depends. If you are doing, say, like a study abroad program and you're enrolled at a school that's a US-based institution, and then through that school, you're taking a program and studying abroad, you could use your aid to do that. But if you're just directly going to enroll in the University of Venice, you cannot take federal or state money and just go directly to the University of Venice with it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, next up is Sanjeev. Sanjeev, you are able to unmute. You're unmuted.
I would like to know what are the options available for international students?
I would say before you mention though, we do have an international student information session on November 23rd, and there will be a Zoom link and more information about that coming. But Claire, I'm not sure if you have anything that you could add.
You guys are probably the better experts on that than I am. I know from a federal or a state perspective, your options are none. And I think because we don't have a large international population at Monmouth, I'm not as well versed in it as probably Mrs. Kandari and Mr. Glassberg are. They're probably better experts than I am, and I think that the program on the 23rd is your best bet.
We'll actually have a panel available there of some people who specialize in that area, so we could try to help you more. You could also email our college counselors, Miss Nadell, and she can give you a little preview of that or some more information. Okay. The next, okay, sorry, it can't be more help than that, but it will be a great presentation. Okay.
I might have to attend.
You're welcome to. Next up, so we have two more. Next up is Ping. Ping On, you are able to unmute.
Oh, hi, Karen. You mentioned that when we apply for financial aid, we use the previous year's federal tax return. If during the year, there's a financial change in the family, can we still go to school to reapply and state the situation has changed?
Exactly. And those were the points that I was making toward the end of my presentation. That's the professional judgment process. You would file the FAFSA using the correct information as it appeared on your tax return. And remember that you're using 2-year-old tax returns. Then once you file the FAFSA using the information as it appears on your financial documents, then you would approach the school and say, hey, wait a minute, my circumstances changed. Look at the horror show of 2020 and how can you help me with that?
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have one more. Lan Hing Chang, you are able to unmute.
Hi, hello. I have a question. Do we do all the college application first before we do the financial aid, or we can do a financial aid first and then like how we work?
That's an excellent question. Think about it like train tracks. They're parallel. So the trains can leave the stations at the same time or at different times. It doesn't really matter. Most institutions, like for example, at Monmouth, our policy is that we won't offer you a financial aid package until you've been admitted to the university. But that doesn't mean that you can't go ahead and at least do your financial aid application ahead of time, and it's submitted, and when we're ready to offer you a package, we will. I think too that the answer to that question is going to vary from school to school. So, I would say get started on your FAFSA as soon as you can. And that way you're just done and you don't have to worry about it. And then the school, when they're ready to process it, they will.
So, so I can send it different time or send it together in the same time?
Different time is fine.
Different time, oh, okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We're going to end it there. Special thank you to Claire Alacio and Karen Kandari for putting this together, and Monica as well for answering the questions in the chat. We are going to preserve this chat, and we'll be able to share that as well as the recording and an updated presentation as well. So we hope that this worked out well. Thank you for going along on this adventure with us. This is our first time doing something like this, and I think we could do many more of them, and I hope that they're helpful and that you have a wonderful school year. Hopefully we can meet again in person at some point soon.
Well,
Take care.
thank you all for having me tonight. It's been my pleasure, and I certainly wish you all the best of luck in your college search process.
Very good.
Claire.
Thank you, and thank you, and have a good night, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.